Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Indispensable Botanicals, New Insights on Ancient Friends, presented by Professor Kerry Bone. My name is Susie Peterson, and I will be the moderator for this webinar. We appreciate your dedication to learning and are honored to have your support for both the MediHerb and Standard Process product lines. Before we begin, I am required to read the following disclaimer. Integrity Healthcare and Standard Process sponsor these webinars to provide healthcare information to practitioners and to provide them the opportunity to hear about the views, recommendations, and experiences of other practitioners. Health-related information provided here is not a substitute for medical advice. No products are discussed in this presentation. Integrity of Standard Process and the speaker, Kerry Bone, do not and cannot accept responsibility for errors or omissions or for any consequences from the applications of the information provided, and make no warranty expressed or implied with respect to the information provided. And now a few words about our presenter. Kerry Bone is the co-founder and innovation driver at MediHerb, where he serves as Director of Research and Development. In 2016, MediHerb was awarded the American Botanical Council Vero E. Tyler Award for Excellence in Phytomedicinal Research. As part of his educational role, Kerry is principal of the Australian College of Phytotherapy and also adjunct professor at New York Chiropractic College, providing input into their postgraduate applied nutrition program. Kerry is co-author of more than 30 scientific papers on herbal research. He has also written and co-written 6 popular textbooks on herbal medicine, including his latest, the second edition of Principles and Practice of Phytotherapy, which was awarded the 2013 James A. Duke Excellence in Botanical Literature Award by the American Botanical Council. Kerry maintains a busy herbal and naturopathic practice in Queensland, where he has been in continuous service for more than 30 years. In 2015, Kerry's lifelong contribution to the field of herbal medicine was recognized with his receiving the prestigious Lady Salento Award from the Complementary Medicine industry in Australia. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Kerry Bone.
Thank you so much, Susie, and good evening, everyone. When we're talking about versatile herbs that can meet many of the health challenges of modern living, we can't go past phellodendron with its key phytochemical berberine and the black cumin, also known as black seed or nigella. There are no two herbs that are more important in addressing a truly wide range of common health issues, like from optimizing thyroid and stress responses, to allergies, to healthy blood fats, and a balanced gastrointestinal flora. No doubt you're motivated to learn more about these new, exciting prescribing opportunities. Having new herbs to talk about will not only enhance your engagement with your patients, it will boost the relevance of your practice and your clinical reach, and so add to your clinical success. But also think on this, with these two herbs, we have effective agents for optimizing a range of conditions that have no equivalent in mainstream medicine. How fortunate we are to have this opportunity to understand these unique ways to help people in their daily lives. Now, you might be thinking that this is an exaggeration. Are these herbs that valuable? And can we really impact these disorders in a clinically relevant way? Or maybe you are picturing the many herbs already available to treat the health issues I mentioned and are wondering where they fit in. And maybe it's a bit confusing. So let's explore now the latest information and thinking about phellodendron and black cumin, especially for the unique properties they offer. And after hearing this webinar, I invite you to agree that they are truly indispensable botanicals and essential for every dispensary, including yours. So our topics for this evening, we'll talk about berberine from the herb phellodendron, some of its targets, how it influences AMPK and thereby impacts metabolic health. Also, how berberine can help with gut health and impact gut pathogens. Black cumin seed we will be talking about as an incredibly versatile herb, and particularly focusing on how it corrects metabolism. But also, I'll make the proposition that black cumin seed is the key anti-allergic herb for your classical allergies like hay fever and asthma. So let's start with looking at berberine from phellodendron. It's a potent phytochemical, berberine. It's an alkaloid. It's yellow in color, and it's familiar to all of us because it's responsible for the activities and indeed yellow color of golden seal and various berberis or barberry species of herbs. It's also found in Chinese herbs, and Coptis chinensis and phellodendron amurens are two very rich sources of berberine and associated alkaloids. Like curcumin, berberine is receiving accelerating research attention as a multifaceted phytochemical. It has a broad range of pharmacological activities, just like curcumin. So there's the structure of berberine, and you can see there's the nitrogen. I'm circling the nitrogen. That's what makes it an alkaloid. And because you have this high degree of conjugation of these double bonds all the way through here, that means it most chemicals absorb in the ultraviolet light, but berberine absorbs in the visible light, and that's what gives it its yellow color. One review on berberine identified at least 90 biological targets. So that's how versatile it is, how multifaceted. The word scientists sometimes use is pleiotropic. Another review suggested that among these, AMPK was one of the key targets of berberine. Now, this is a very important finding and indeed a very important mechanism in cellular health, which I will be discussing soon. Now, one of the things about berberine is it has relatively low oral bioavailability. You see around 0.4%, so it's not that high. And this appears to be due to a protein that's found in the gut wall known as P-glycoprotein. And what happens is as the berberine is absorbing across the cell membrane of the enterocyte, the cell lining the gut wall, they're expressing or activating P-glycoprotein and pumping it back out. So the berberine's naturally going in, and the enterocyte saying, "Oh no, you don't," out you go. And so that inhibits its absorption because it's pumped back out. Interestingly, silymarin from milk thistle is a clinically relevant inhibitor of PGP or P-glycoprotein. So there's been a suggestion and some research that combining silymarin with berberine helps its bioavailability. One of the issues with berberine, especially because it's an alkaloid, and as you know, alkaloids are highly bioactive substances. For example, ephedrine in ephedra, cocaine in the coca plant, and the various opiate alkaloids that are found in the opium poppy. So alkaloids have a reputation for being very active. So is long-term berberine safe? Well, despite the fact it's an alkaloid, it has quite low toxicity. However, we do advise that it is best to avoid during pregnancy and lactation, but there's no clear evidence of harm, but it's just mainly a precaution. A lot of the side effects from clinical trials, especially at higher doses, are mainly gastrointestinal and on the mild side. So things like bloating, mild diarrhea, nausea, and mainly constipation. And it suggests that in some people, their gut flora might be a bit overly sensitive to berberine. I'm going to address this issue of berberine and gut flora in detail further, but I'm suggesting that the patients who show these side effects, especially to an extent that it's not comfortable for them to tolerate berberine, are probably the ones for which the adverse effects on gut flora apply. So it's like an automatic self-selecting process that the people for whom it might upset their gut flora significantly tend to be unable to tolerate it right away. But having said that's quite a small percentage. Now, in terms of getting significant clinical activity, we recommend using it from a herbal source like phellodendron and starting at 400 to 600 milligrams a day and building up to 800 milligrams if necessary. I generally don't go higher than that amount. And indeed, if we want to increase the effect at any type of dosage, but especially at that higher dosage, we can use silymarin as a synergist. And to avoid interactions, take it separately from conventional drugs by around 2 hours, and don't take it with any tannin plants or herbs like tea or herbal teas or certain herbs like albizia, for example. Don't take it at the same time because tannins tie up alkaloids and can interfere with their absorption. So this is from a review, an excellent review, which you see referenced there here on the right, that was done by Michelle Morgan. And have a look at what the clinical studies of berberine have shown. And I'll go through some of these in detail, but you see there are gut effects, including Giardia, Helicobacter, and even intestinal syndrome, diarrhea, and what have you, caused by radiotherapy. There are effects on lipids, lowering blood lipids. There are effects on, so if we go to the third dot point here, there are effects on controlling blood sugar. And then we have a range of effects, including some anti-inflammatory effects, effects in polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, I'll show you that, fatty liver, and at very high doses, probably higher than what I recommend, it does have some anti-arrhythmic effects in the heart. So you see a very versatile phytochemical affecting a wide range of targets and therefore a wide range of clinical outcomes in again, very diverse patient cohorts, as you can see there. So let's now take a deeper dive and have a look at the impact of berberine on AMPK and metabolic health. So what is AMPK? Well, AMPK is the central energy switch. It's a cellular energy sensor that regulates how our energy is used and produced in the body, but at the cellular level. And essentially, the AMPK system senses and responds to changes in energy metabolism in the cell, but then that will, of course, reflect on the whole body, but it's cellular. And it's sensing the AMP to ATP ratio. So AMPK gets activated when there's a low energy status of the cell. And that low energy status of the cell is sensed as a high AMP to ATP ratio. So a lot of the ATP in the cell has been used up to make energy, and the byproduct AMP is being produced. So that AMP needs to be regenerated to ATP. It might not be happening quick enough, and the energy status of the cell is low. So AMPK is switched on, and it switches cellular metabolism from those pathways, those anabolic pathways that are consuming ATP, to those energy breaking down pathways, the catabolic pathways that are producing ATP. And as a result, it regulates a wide array of biological activities at the whole body level, such as normalizing lipid, glucose, and energy imbalances. And therefore, it's implicated as having value in conditions like metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular risk and disease. Now, if we look at agents known to activate AMPK, we have the conventional drug metformin. That is known as principally activating AMPK. It has other effects, but one of its key effects is activating AMPK. And then certainly metformin is being discussed as an anti-aging drug because of its AMPK effects. And if we look at the natural area, two key ones are berberine and resveratrol. There's also curcumin, but curcumin is so pleiotropic, it activates so many key targets. But berberine and resveratrol are more targeted. Resveratrol also activates sirtuins, especially sirtuin 1. Now, in addition to short-term effects, activating AMPK has longer-term impact by regulating the production of key proteins involved in cellular energy. So here we have this diagram, and it shows how central AMPK is in regulating cellular and whole body metabolism. So in the inner circle, you have some of the immediate targets of AMPK, and you see you've got two types of things, images or projecting out of the AMPK. So you see you've got a blocking symbol with, the right-angled end to it, bar at the end, and that means it blocks that target, and you've got the pointy arrow, which means it facilitates that target. So you see it blocks mTOR C1. We'll be talking about that. And that's good, and it facilitates FOXO, and that's good too. These are in terms of longevity, for example. And so you see the immediate targets, and then the pathway or metabolic impacts in the next outer circle of blue boxes, and then immediately outside in the red boxes, you've got what that fundamentally translates to. So glucose metabolism, anti-inflammation, anti-aging, redox regulation, lipid metabolism, and protein synthesis. So very core and central. And here's another diagram that focuses on a few of these targets in a cellular diagram. So here we have a cell, and here is the nucleus of the cell, and here's the AMPK in the cytosol of the cell. And you see that adiponectin facilitates AMPK. And curcumin, we know, facilitates adiponectin, so it may well be acting indirectly via that pathway. Then we have things like insulin and IGF, and glucose, they block AMPK. And if we look at some of the impacts of AMPK, you see over here, it's facilitating on the right protein synthesis. You see down below here, very interestingly, it's blocking HMG-CO reductase. Now, that is the target of statin drugs, and statin drugs, as we know, lower cholesterol. AMPK is very important for mitochondrial health. And so you see up here, here's the AMPK target in the green box, and also the sirtuin 1 target is important as well. And you see calorie restriction and exercise and polyphenols, but really we're looking at berberine, resveratrol, and curcumin facilitate sirtuin-1 and AMPK. Resveratrol more on sirtuin-1, berberine more on AMPK. And what that does is that stimulates a process called, what I say, pronounced as mitophagy, you might say mitophagy, and that's the turnover of mitochondria. So what happens in our cell is, as our mitochondria, they're the powerhouses of the cell, so they're involved in energy production. So they're like at the furnaces, and it's producing all of these very active molecules, and so they get damaged, and their DNA is not, mitochondrial DNA is not protected like nuclear DNA is by the chromatin, and so that gets damaged too. So as our mitochondria work to produce energy, they get damaged in that very process. So it's important we turn them over and produce new, fresh, healthy ones using the same raw material. So we digest the old sick mitochondria in the cell and produce new ones. And this has profound implications across a whole range of health outcomes, but anti-aging, metabolic balance, and so on. So it's very important that our mitophagy or mitophagy processes are working well. And you see, via sirtuin-1 and AMPK, with these key plant chemicals, these key phytochemicals, we are stimulating that process. Also, there's an impact, very importantly, on PGC1 alpha, and PGC1 alpha stimulates mitochondrial number and function. So by targeting AMPK, for example, with berberine, we're not just turning over our mitochondria in an optimized way, producing healthy new ones, we're also making more of them and making those mitochondria more active. It's absolutely brilliant the way this has been designed. But there's even more, and that is, if we look over here to the left in the orange, you see stimulating AMPK blocks mTORC1, which is a blocker of mitophagy. So, and high-fat diet and type 2 diabetes facilitate mTORC1. So I'm going to talk about some of the impacts of mTORC1. And I'm just highlighting that berberine AMPK connection there. So mTORC1, if that is elevated, you see you get increases in, there's my arrow, body mass index, obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance. That one's been censored, but maybe you can guess it. And acne vulgaris. So very interesting, isn't it, that upregulated mTORC1 is linked to acne. But all of these issues, therefore, by stimulating AMPK, for example, with berberine, you're going to impact on them. Obesity, elevated body mass index, acne, insulin resistance, diabetes. And I'll be talking about some of these going forward. So let's have a look at this study of blood biochemistry values of New York City adults with and without moderate to severe acne. So you have the no acne group and the moderate severe acne group being compared for things like insulin. Well, there's a significant difference, isn't it? The acne seems to be linked with a bit of insulin resistance because the insulin is much higher in the acne group compared to no acne. Sex hormone binding globulin is lower. So you're getting more effects, for example, from free testosterone that would be impacting on the acne. And again, HOMA-IR, which is a measure of insulin resistance, again, at 1.04 versus 0.58, is higher with acne. Now, there's no difference in fasting blood glucose, but if we look at insulin-like growth factor 1, which I've talked about before, IGF-1, you see IGF-1 is lower in the no active group. And quite a few of these impacts on insulin resistance, sex hormone binding globulin, and IGF-1 can be imputed by upregulation of mTOR-C1. So here's the very interesting trial that was done in women with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, using berberine. Now, it was a fairly high dose of berberine, and they compared it with the drug metformin. And have a look at insulin resistance. So it dropped from 4.9 to 2.6 in the berberine group, and a similar drop in the metformin group. Sex hormone binding globulin increased from 33.7 to 58.3 in the berberine group, a similar increase in the metformin group as well. So essentially what we're saying here is that berberine, because of its effects on IGF-1, its effects on sex hormone binding globulin, all mediated probably by these effects by AMPK on mTOR-C1, has value in acne, internally taken, not topical, value there too, but internally value in the management of acne. So I put that in to illustrate how we can, with biological plausibility, extrapolate, and indeed, as I've shown you, using clinical data from acne and then clinical data of a trial in women with PCOS, connect the dots and say it follows, therefore, that internal use of berberine from phellodendron will be useful in acne sufferers. Let's now look at berberine in metabolic syndrome, because there we have direct evidence. It was a small trial, and at a high dose, only 24 people in patients with metabolic syndrome. But there was a significant remission rate of 36%. So suddenly, 1/3, just by taking berberine, 1/3 no longer had metabolic syndrome. Also favorably impacted systolic blood pressure, triglycerides, and insulin resistance. There have been many trials of berberine in patients with type 2 diabetes. And these were reviewed because many of them are in Chinese. And so we're fortunate, the Chinese language, we're fortunate that systematic review and meta-analysis in October 2012 analyzed this clinical data. It was 14 randomized controlled trials in more than 1,000 people, all conducted in China, and 11 were published in Chinese, presumably Mandarin, although I think written Chinese doesn't matter, it's just Chinese. Daily dose of berberine ranged from 500 to 2,700 milligrams a day, typically in the range about 900 to 1,500, and treatment was from 8 to 24 weeks. Now, various scenarios were picked out and analyzed in the meta-analysis. So berberine plus lifestyle modification was compared with lifestyle modification alone, and it was more effective in lowering fasting plasma glucose if the berberine was included instead of a placebo. Also, if we look at just no lifestyle modification, just berberine versus a placebo, it reduced postprandial plasma glucose and HbA1c levels, glycosylated hemoglobin levels. And similar control was observed when berberine was compared head-to-head against allopathic therapies, so like metformin, like that PCOS trial I showed you, berberine and metformin, similar activity. But I want to pick out this particular aspect of the meta-analysis you can see here on the slide. And it's berberine combined with conventional drugs, oral hypoglycemic drugs, versus the same hypoglycemics alone. Because we often see this in a clinical situation where the patient type 2 diabetes patient is taking one or two conventional hypoglycemic drugs. Their blood glucose control and indeed overall metabolism, metabolic balance is not optimal. So is there value in adding a natural treatment such as berberine from phellodendron to that regime? And the answer from this meta-analysis, and you can see it includes 6 clinical trials, is yes. So there's the diamond of the pooled results, and as you can see, it clears very clearly. This is the no effect line there, and the diamond is clearing the no effect line. So the pooled results of all these 6 trials with their error bars, and you can see if the error bar touches the no effect line or goes over the no effect line, that's non-significant. So 3 trials weren't significant, 4 trials weren't significant, 2 were. Yet when we pool, and this is the great value of meta-analysis, yet when we pool all the results of those 6 trials together, we see a clear value of the combination of berberine with oral hypoglycemic drugs. So I already mentioned about augmenting berberine's activity with silymarin from milk thistle. And this has been shown in a clinical trial. It was a combination of berberine, in this case 1,000 milligrams, and just 210 milligrams of silymarin extract with silymarin. The content of that 210 milligram was only 60% silymarin, so that's 120-30 milligrams of silymarin as the phytochemical group, because it's more than one phytochemical, silymarin. And this was just given at night in 26 poorly controlled people with type 2 diabetes. And after 90 days, there were significant positive outcomes, such as reductions in HbA1c almost by a full percentage point from 8% to 7%, fasting insulin, triglycerides, cholesterol, and insulin resistance dropped by 26%. So blood glucose management. I know there are other herbs we've talked about in this context, but these days, and given that type 2 diabetes is a progressive disorder, and eventually the drugs start to fail, and then, oh, is it insulin injections? We having more options is better. So as well as your fenugreek and your bitter melon and cinnamon and nigella, which I'll be talking about, or black cumin, having an option like berberine is useful. Now, the other important advantage of berberine is that it impacts on high cholesterol levels. Now, we can debate for some time the pros and cons of manipulating cholesterol levels and overall effect on health. I think one of the things that confounds that debate is the discussion about statins because of the way they act. So I think sometimes the value of lowering cholesterol gets wound in with concerns over statins, and the two separate issues get conflated. So my point is this, that I personally feel, and I've read the literature extensively, there is some value if we do it naturally in modulating high cholesterol. In any case, the patient is probably under pressure from their doctors to do this. And therefore, if we can offer them a natural option, and this happens many times in my clinics, the patients are relieved because they can come back with a better value and the doctor is no longer suggesting that they take a statin. So I just wanted to contextualize this because I know there's a lot of discussion on this topic of high blood cholesterol. So we do have very good evidence here for berberine. There was a systematic review and meta-analysis that identified 11 randomized controlled trials. Quality of trials was generally low, but the meta-analysis did find significant reductions in total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides, and even as a bonus, a small rise in good cholesterol or HDL cholesterol. So there's the trial meta-analysis, and again, you can see that diamond clearly crosses the no effect line on the forest plot. So the final topic I'd like to talk about with berberine is its impact on gut health and gut pathogens, and that was very nicely highlighted by that slide I had reviewing the data from the review done by Michelle Morgan. So as said already, phellodendron is a rich source of berberine, and the berberine has broad antimicrobial activity and exhibits poor absorption from the gut. And that's good. So I mentioned it's 0.4%. Maybe you use silymarin, that might go up to 1%, but there still remains that 99% of the berberine you give someone is there in the gut, all the way through, available to exert antimicrobial activity. So it's poor absorption for gut effects, especially against pathogens, work for us. And the other added advantage is that berberine is broad spectrum. It's active against bacteria, fungi, and protozoa. And because of that broad spectrum activity, you're not as likely to distort the natural balance of your gut flora. The problem with antibiotics is not that they kill all the bacteria. They're selective on certain bacteria, allow others to grow, allow fungi to grow because they're focused on bacteria, allow protozoa to go. So something that's broad spectrum is far less likely to imbalance gut flora. In fact, can be used as per my GI protocol, can actually be used to create space to encourage the healthy bacteria to grow into. And it's very interesting that I'm finding now in the mainstream literature, people talking more and more about manipulating gut flora, which is what the GI protocol is about, and manipulating gut flora in order to improve health outcomes. So rather than take them as a probiotic, manipulate what's already there for a healthy profile. So that's now getting serious, credible attention. And the GI protocol, which I've been advocating for at least the past decade and a half, already is working on that basis. So I kind of said that already. Most of the administered dose will remain in the gut. Now, berberine also inhibits pathogenic bacterial adherence, and that's really good because a lot of the pathogenicity of bacteria is due to their adherence. For example, E. coli. E. coli varies from being, a normal gut flora component with probably good health outcomes to something that can kill you. And what differentiates the strains that can kill you from the healthy ones is their high degree of bacterial adherence to the gut wall. So randomized controlled trials, as mentioned earlier, of berberine in gut disorders include Giardia as an added-on treatment for Helicobacter, as an added-on treatment in ulcerative colitis, in diarrhea predominant irritable bowel syndrome, known as IBS-D. And its potential uses include a protocol for SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and as part of a revised version of the protocol. So here's an example of a protocol, a SIBO protocol that I would use. And it's only an example, but it's illustrating some key points. So it's over 20-day cycles, 10 days weed, 10 days feed. Now, in practice, especially earlier on, the feed cycle, you might want to shorten that because my experience is patients with SIBO, when they're on the weeding phase, they say, hey, I feel really great. And then they go back to the feeding phase and they don't feel so good. So you probably eventually stretch it out to 10 days. Now, important point I'd make here is that this protocol, not the one that's on slide here, on slide 32, but the normal one, as I mentioned, is about manipulating gut flora. It's not about killing. If you want to kill certain target organisms, or indeed kill a whole lot because they're growing in an area where they shouldn't, like with SIBO, you have to be a bit more aggressive. And that's where the phellodendron extract rich in berberine can come in with great value. So you see you've got that combination of andrographis, phellodendron, anise, and oregano oil 2 times daily, and if we want to be aggressive, 2 times daily, 2 or even 3 capsules, and then the phellodendron extract in berberine 2 times daily, again, 2 or even 3 tablets. So we're being aggressive, and we can even add in other things, as you see down below here, myrrh resin, garlic, biofilm strategies, all of those can be added in that killing strategy. And then we do the feeding, which is encouraging back the healthy gut flora. Probiotics, fiber to feed the healthy gut flora, and rosemary, which suppresses, and especially in SIBO, because you don't want these organisms to go back. It's especially this rosemary, green tea, grapeseed, turmeric combination that is of value, because it will help. It will help inhibit the regrowth of bacteria, as indeed will the probiotic. So that's just an example. I mean, SIBO is a whole lecture in itself, but I thought I'd just put that in there to show how we can enrich our protocols with berberine. Now, one of the critical issues, and I did have touched on it already, is there have been concerns that berberine might imbalance gut flora, like antibiotics. Say you want to give it, someone's got elevated cholesterol and blood glucose, so you want to give it for a certain period of time, but it over months or even years, it's going to imbalance their gut flora and cause problems with their health. So let's have a look at that. So as I mentioned, it's broad spectrum, so it's less likely to induce a flora balance. The other interesting thing is that tests have shown that berberine is less active against healthy gut flora than pathogenic bacteria. Also, there's been a study in rats that fed a high-fat diet that berberine improved healthy bowel flora, the short-chain fatty acid produces. So here we see on this diagram, so IC50, that's the inhibitory concentration required of the berberine in 50% of the population or tests done. And you see that against pathogenic bacteria like Bacillus and E. coli, it's quite active. But against bifidobacterium, the IC50 is quite high, which means it's less active. In fact, 10 times less active as against Bacillus and There was also a study in patients with newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes who received 900 milligrams of berberine, which exceeds my recommended 800 for 8 weeks. And when they analysed their fecal samples, they found significant increases in the level of healthy bifidobacterium. And that was correlated with anti-inflammatory effects in terms of TNF-alpha and lower levels of LPS. And there also, as expected, were significant improvements in blood glucose and lipids. So on the face of the evidence, berberine long-term will not imbalance gut flora. It appears to induce healthy changes in gut flora. That's on the evidence. So we can speculate all we like about theoretical concerns. The evidence shows that there aren't any concerns. But as I also mentioned, the people whose gut flora might be more sensitive to adverse effects from berberine, generally they get those gut side effects right away when they take it. So they're naturally going to be selected against for long-term use anyway. So now I'd like to talk about the black cumin. and I call it the versatile herb. And there you see a lovely diagram of its seed capsule. So those black seeds are in that seed capsule. It's been described as the cure for every disease except death, which is fairly wonderful. That's in Middle Eastern writings. It certainly is versatile. If we look back to tradition, Avicenna, the 12th century, I think he was, physician, referred to it as the seed that stimulates the body's energy and helps recovery from fatigue and dispiritedness, so what we call depression now, so fatigue and depression. Randomized controlled trials show activity improving asthma, allergies, hypothyroidism, abnormal blood glucose and lipids, hypertension, body weight, Helicobacter pylori infection, even kidney stone dissolution, respiratory damage, chemotherapy side effects, memory, mood, and anxiety. And you have that supplementary reference list with those trials and other research on them. Again, it's contraindicated in pregnancy, but mainly a theoretical concern, but nonetheless, it's best to be on the cautious side. If we look at, for example, black cumin seed and clinical trials in Helicobacter pylori infection of the stomach, which is implicated in gastric ulcers and indeed in gastric cancers. So there's a small open trial of 2 grams of black cumin seeds in 4 grams of honey 3 times a day for 2 weeks. And Helicobacter had been addressed or lowered in 57% based on the urea breath test. So that's with no drugs, improvement in 57%. In this trial, 2 grams a day of black cumin was added to the proton pump inhibitor omeprazole for 4 weeks, and it produced a statistically comparable, although lower, addressing of Helicobacter pylori at 67% compared to standard triple therapy. Interestingly, black cumin has a role in improving thyroid function, and I feel this is a highly significant development. It's a randomized controlled trial in patients with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Black cumin seeds at just merely 2 grams a day for 8 weeks. It significantly reduced body weight and body mass index, but concentrations of TSH and indeed antithyroid peroxidase antibodies decreased while serum T3 increased. So it's clearly stimulating thyroid function and dealing with those antithyroid antibodies. There's also a significant reduction in serum vascular endothelial growth factor, which probably has other health implications, but it's not so relevant to the thyroid aspect. Now, I've done a series of seminars and indeed a webinar on the role of black cumin in correcting metabolism. So we're just going to briefly revisit these. And black cumin seed at 3 grams a day for 12 weeks in people at risk of metabolic syndrome significantly improved lipid levels. HDL cholesterol went up, LDL cholesterol went down, and triglycerides went down, all versus placebo. And there was also this trial in menopausal women with metabolic syndrome. And again, total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides went down versus placebo. Now, what I haven't presented before, because it's fairly recent, is some meta-analyses of black cumin in this regard. So firstly, we have a meta-analysis of 11 randomized controlled trials looking at short-term treatment on it, reducing systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure. And preparations of black cumin seed powder and oil demonstrated different lowering effects in favor of the black cumin seed powder or its extracts. So that's what I generally recommend that you use. So black cumin seed oil is a pressed lipid-based oil pressed out of the seed, so like flaxseed oil. And it doesn't carry as many and the full balance of the phytochemicals like the seed powder or indeed an extract of the seed powder. So it's the extracts of the seed powder is what I recommend, and they were certainly shown to be more active in lowering systolic and diastolic blood pressure. There was also a meta-analysis, again, of 11 trials, different trials of black cumin, and showed that it was capable of reducing body weight, BMI, and waist circumference, so these metabolic effects. So here's some trials of a black cumin seed in type 2 diabetes. Firstly, let's look at glycemic control, sugar control. And you see over the right here, and the thing to look at is these percentages. So you see fasting plasma glucose down 26%, HbA1c down 16%, and so on. Insulin resistance down 25%. Then we have this interesting trial that looked at time points of 3, 6, 9, and 12 months for fasting plasma glucose and HbA1c. And you see, if you look at that's the baseline, so that's not going to change, but look at the times at 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And you see, it's actually getting a little bit worse. The blood glucose is going up. Oh, and it's actually getting a little bit worse. The HbA1c going worse. Oh, so does that mean the black cumin seed is wearing off? No, it doesn't. It's not that its effects are wearing off. It's that type 2 diabetes, as I mentioned earlier, is a progressive disease. And that's why as it progresses in a patient, we need more and more intervention. So if we can do that naturally, and of course, do all the dietary and lifestyle changes to stop it progressing, then we can really help this significant problem of its progression. But that's all that's illustrated there, not that the black cumin seed is wearing off. And you see other trials that are there show similar results. And then again, if we look at the lipids from similar trials, we see reductions in total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides in that top trial. And then this trial where they looked at 6, 9, 12 months, we see the total cholesterol was reduced significantly and the LDL cholesterol reduced. And similar results reflected in the other trials. Now, the references for these are in a review by Michelle Morgan, Phytotherapist Perspective number 234. So the final point I'd like to finish this evening's presentation with is that black cumin is now, on the basis of evidence, clinical evidence, the key anti-allergic herb. So let's look at allergic rhinitis or hay fever. There are 4 clinical trials showing positive effects of the use of black cumin seed in allergic rhinitis. Doses varied from probably the ridiculously low at 250 milligrams to your more standard dose of a couple of grams a day. I generally dose about 2 to 4 grams a day of black cumin seed across all its applications. Now let's have a look at this particular trial in seasonal allergic rhinitis, which is hay fever. So you see the references here on the right. And they compared it against a drug that modifies immune activity called montelukast. SS stands for symptom score. So if we look at the daytime symptoms, and day 0 was before the intervention, and day 7, 1 week, and day 14, 2 weeks after the intervention. So you see daytime symptoms for the drug went down 25 to 19 to 4. It showed it worked. But for the black cumin, the Nigella sativa, daytime symptoms improved even better, 24 to 13 to 3, all significant. Let's look at the eye symptoms, because we know that hay fever can give you terribly itchy eyes. There was improvement with the drug, 13 to 10 to 7, but much more so with the black cumin, 14 to 10 to 2. Nighttime symptom scores you see 12, 12, 11.58 were unchanged with the drug, whereas nighttime symptom scores with the herb were substantially better, 13 down to 6. Now, we could say, oh, maybe it's still placebo and you haven't picked out a placebo effect because you're comparing against a drug and maybe the drug's not that good. So it's interesting that the authors included an objective measurement, which was eosinophil count. We know eosinophils are involved in allergy, because it's very hard to say if someone's eosinophils drop that it's a placebo effect. And this drug actually targets such cells, this montelukast. So you see the eosinophils fell from 8 to 4 after 14 days with the drug, but with the black cumin, they dropped from 8 to 3. So a comparable result that again was clinically significant. So that's just one reason why I suggest this is an extremely important herb, the key herb for allergy. Now let's look at, there are a few asthma trials. Let's look at this one. This was you see the gray box on the left. This was a randomized controlled trial in 76 people with asthma that compared Nigella sativa or black cumin at 1 gram a day and 2 grams a day and placebo. So there you have the different doses at different time points. So NS1 here on the left, that's the 1 gram dose. NS2 is the 2 gram dose. And here's the placebo. So there was some improvement if we go far right in the placebo, but the herb at 1 gram and 2 gram was significantly better than the placebo. And so you might say, oh, well, you don't necessarily need such a high dose. But when they looked at objective measures, like forced expiratory volume in 1 second, that increased significantly at both the 6 and 12-week groups, only in the higher dose group. So clear dose response effect when you go to objective measures. Other objective measures like eosinophil count, no, not eosinophil count, IgE it was. Other objective measures like blood IgE will also only increase significantly in the higher dose. And you've got a patient with severe asthma, you might need to go higher. You might need to go up to 4 grams a day. It's all about dose versus activity. So just a quick summary for the black cumin seed, just to cap off. It's a major herb for allergies, and you're talking here asthma, hay fever, eczema, and urticaria. It's a key herb for insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. It's a new development for boosting thyroid function. It will help with cardiovascular risk, both in terms of lipids and blood pressure, high-level evidence for both, and it's a useful part of a Helicobacter reduction protocol. Traditionally, and let's keep this in mind, it's a tonic, and it supports immunity and boosts mood. And I met some doctors from Saudi Arabia at a conference, and we got talking about black cumin, and they said, yes, in Saudi Arabia, it's our #1 herb for chronic fatigue syndrome. And that harkens back more to its traditional uses as a tonic and supporting immunity. Now, we're still waiting on the clinical trials there, but I do, from time to time, also use the black cumin in my chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia protocols, as well as to boost and balance immune function, given its anti-allergy effects as well. So, thank you. Thank you very much for attending this webinar.